Call the meeting to order. This is the in-person and Zoom 2229 Main Street Advisory Task Force meeting of November 28th, 2023. I'm Paul Bowman, Chairman of the Task Force. And first thing I'll call the roll. Where should we start? Carl Seidman. Here. Gord Booth. Here. Rich Feely. Here. Gary Kleiman. Here. David Roby. Here. Pam Hill. Here. Carrie Flood.
Here.
And I'm here, Paul Bowman. But we have a quorum. Put the agenda up in a moment. I want to welcome others in the room here. Megan Zamudo, Chris Carmody, Pam Rockwell, and on Zoom, Kara, Emmy, etc. So we're all here. Hi. First order of business is approval of the minutes. Before I do, I want to belatedly thank Rich. Maybe I don't speak correctly. Diligently taking minutes through all this, and including the public forum, which I want to discuss. But thank you for your efforts in there.
Yeah, thank you.
Not always the easiest thing to do. So let's start with, and hopefully you've had a chance to review the minutes. Any comments on the October 18th minutes?
Yeah, I thought they were great.
Second,
Okay, all in favor, approving
I-
October 18th? Okay, October 18th minutes are approved. Minutes on November 2nd.
Rich should keep taking minutes. He does a good job.
Put that in the minutes.
Right, I mean, he's doing such a good job, nobody else is going to.
No, I read it. and
So no
everything.
comments, so I have a,
goes.
so I have a motion,
So
moved.
Second, yeah.
all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, it passes unanimously. So let me talk about the November 9th minutes. So Rich did the November 9th minutes, he sent them to me. But before I post them, I had a question. The minutes, it was a public forum, so it wasn't a regular meeting, and so the minutes, Rich very diligently took notes about our presentations and about all the questions and all the answers. My full concern, and it's all on tape, it's all on video, so anybody can look at it. I was just a little concerned that in capturing the questions and the answers, unless they weren't verbatim answers, somebody could look at the minutes and say, that's not what I said. Because it's very hard for Rich to kind of write down as everything is going, and there were a lot of, back and forth, and some of the questions weren't questions, they were statements. So going through those, they weren't perfect. And no offense, Rich, but there was, there's a lot of conversation there. So I was wondering, I want the task force to discuss whether we should, for those minutes, we should put in the Q&A or just refer to in the minutes, refer to the video if anybody wanted to go through those, or somehow paraphrase them somewhere in between the two.
Perhaps, describe the nature of the questions, sort of the topics that were covered. And again, refer to the video.
I think that's often what's done is the name of the person posed a question about blah, 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 period. And I think that's sufficient, but I'm curious, Rich, what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I did it, where somebody had an opinion one way or the other. I'd say it, I mean, like the woman who spoke rather strongly against using it for any housing purpose. That's what I said, basically. I didn't give all the details. So I could just say, spoke about whether or not it should be used, or I could say, spoke against using it for housing. And expressed her concern about migration of contaminants from the site and stuff like that. I mean, I can edit it to essentially just give the topic and leave everything else out. I did give a copy to David because I thought he could, at least have the tenor of what was said and who said it, if, we needed it for communications purposes. So I At the moment, it's, I'm sure that a couple of things would need to be edited, but it's in between.
It is in between, and the answers are in between as well, so
Mhm.
maybe if, you captured sort of an advanced paraphrasing, I'd call it. So I'm wondering if you could just take a look at it, maybe bring it down a little bit to kind of the basics, because it almost sounds like you're trying to transcribe the answers. I just don't want to have anybody look at those and
I think
take exception.
your point's well taken. If it's very basic, it's really not arguable. But then, as soon as you go beyond that, you might as well look at the whole tape.
Right.
Go to the transcript.
Right.
My
And-
reaction to
and-
what he sent, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
my reaction to what it was, all it needs is a disclaimer that the following is paraphrased, done. See the tape for more detail. So we're covered for not getting it exactly right if somebody cares, which I think highly unlikely, but we're covered. And on we go in whatever form they are, because they're really only a kind of a starting place. They're not the transcript.
right.
And nobody expects them to be. I think it would be highly unlikely that anybody would expect that to be a transcript, and the tape is available, so the following is a paraphrase is captured that by the note taking during the meeting, the full record is on tape. Boom, done.
I mean, I think in some ways it's more important to have the questions and the statements than the actual answers,
Yes,
because I think to not have that, someone could misinterpret it as, well, you ignored me, or my concerns aren't on the record, so getting the answers exact, I think is less important than just documenting the questions and concerns. that
and
came
in
up.
several cases, the response was not necessarily an answer to the question, but a more interpretive. And when more than one person contributed to that response, it gets really complicated into trying to,
Okay.
yeah.
So I guess the sense is, Richard, just, I think maybe you did just refer to the tape and say this is paraphrasing and just trying to capture the essence, which I think you largely did, but just go back. Based on this
So I put a
conversation.
disclaimer in up front,
Yeah,
and then, if people think I got something wildly wrong, we can correct it when the minutes are distributed to them.
and they just want to make sure we didn't miss anybody, because the first iteration of the video, as published, we missed somebody. And that person complained, and we had to go to Minuteman Network and redo it, so we just don't want to miss anybody. And did you look at the video and?
I did, to be sure that I had everybody. Some names I just had in my own shorthand and had to go back to the video, and in some places I modified it a bit when I listened to what they had to say. Particularly where I thought I was rushed in taking minutes, I'd go back and listen to the tape, but it's still a paraphrase.
Yeah. It was a high degree of difficulty, so thank you for that. Pam,
So my question is, are you gonna have a part of your report that is going to be things like the questions that you got from people during your work, an appendix of your report that's gonna be the questions that came up during your work, in which case that's a separate thing from a set of minutes. That's like an Excel spreadsheet of questions people came up with for you, or comments that they had.
I don't know whether we're gonna do that yet, but we'll have to discuss the report, and it would be an appendix like we did with the previous report. But that was from the workshop, but we did get written comments in the reuse. In
We got
response to the
written comments
survey.
and we had them in the survey.
The survey, so, which is different here, so, but we'll discuss how and if to include.
But
those
you don't wanna
in the
lose
report.
the,
Yeah.
don't like lose your copies of the long version of what you wrote already.
I would think in the final report, we'll capture some essence of public input. And the forum will be reflected as part of that public input, but probably not the actual minutes,
Right.
probably some other form.
So, any more comments on that?
Rich Hero, we captured the names of people who signed it and sent it to me, and I have them. They do.
I have a lot of them as well. I was taking notes.
And is that part of the minutes, the sign-in sheet?
It's not at the moment. I went back to it to get names where I didn't have them. But, or where I couldn't figure it out from the tape, but I don't have a copy.
we probably should get the sign-in sheet attached to the minutes. You already have the presentation attached to the minutes, which is one of the. Yeah, I don't want to overthink this, but that's, I just wanted to discuss that.
Let me back up. Chris, did you send that to me or did Rich? I want to give credit where it's due.
Must have been Chris.
Okay.
Okay, so that's a minute, so we'll get to tighten it up and we'll review that for the next meeting. So now the next agenda item is actually discussion of a debrief on the public forum, and we, first of all, I want to thank, I think it went well, I think everybody. The input that I got, response was that, wow, it's an incredible group, everybody, very well done. Very clear what we were doing, I think the individual groups that went over very well. Because I asked if it was too detailed, they said, no, not at all. Anyways, I got some positive feedback. Everyone want to start?
Yeah, I'd love to start because I actually went through a very similar experience on Wednesday night and Thursday night, participating in two very public forums in the same room.
Yeah.
With very different reactions from a member of the public who shall remain nameless. I spoke to them who had attended both events, and they said it was sort of night and day. And I don't want to disparage my colleagues on the Natural Resources Commission, but they said that we were very open, very, welcoming to the community, feeling like we were there to provide information, to listen, and that it, they had very positive things to say. NRC meeting on Warner's Pond, they felt like we were basically delivering a message of what we had already told the public in the past and didn't seem as open. So I want to congratulate everybody here on giving a very different impression. So
Thank you. First, we had the advantage that we didn't have any opinions. Our work was kind of starting. We had,
I think we came across as being very.
yeah, later on, so,
The more profound response that I would add to that is not only did we not have any opinions, but compared to a lot of other issues in town, this is not as heated. That's what I took from it.
At the moment,
We were braced against what we might hear about, real strong advocacy. This was not a lightning rod issue yet. It may yet be, and a little bit of the feedback I got afterwards was, all I hear from the people that I've talked to is risk, but maybe that's because they're talking to me, I don't know. But, people are afraid of chemicals and all of those boogeymen, but we didn't hear that passion. And I was listening for that. I was listening for the mood, and the mood was very reasonable, which is just not where the Warner's Pond issue is. So you were kind of condemned going in. What happens though is, and we should bear this in mind, I doubt it'll happen to us, given that's the first meeting and conversations that I've had with people is, but when issues become more heated, the committee that is facing the heated gets defensive. And shuts down and becomes more, you're not listening to us.
Yeah.
So that's a lesson worth noting, should that arise for us, but I didn't hear it at our meeting and I doubt we will.
court.
I think the contrast is important to note, but I don't think we should overinterpret it, because to your point, these two initiatives are in very different phases, very, very different phases. Where Warner's Pond, you've got a camp that is already fearful of losing. Nobody around this is fearful of losing yet, not getting perhaps what they want. The direct feedback I got was somebody who said, I went to the league forum, I went to this meeting, and they were both great, and I didn't learn anything new, which means you did a good job on the first one. So really praise for the league, and we had largely a new audience for the forum. Not entirely.
Yeah, the difference was.
And they met all of us.
This is the one, they met you guys, which is important, because it's a very credible group, you're known in town and a lot of different skill. But also, I think the depth that you're going into, the questions and the answers, I think. Somewhere between like totally competent and overwhelming, which is good, it means we're covering everything. Right. That's the theme of this, no stone unturned, we're gonna have a t-shirt, no stone unturned.
I wish there were a way to know what the attitude or predisposition is of people who don't show up at a meeting like that. I mean, you look around the room and in our committee, but also the audience, there tends to be the older population in town that may have more of a memory of what was going on there or what they believed was going on there when it was in use. But I didn't see, parents of young children sitting in the room the way we would at a school committee issue.
So, I would point out that a year ago, there were meetings about warrant. There was a big survey. There was a whole lot of effort made to get people's opinions. It came in overwhelmingly that people in Concord wanted the dam removed. It was like all this preparation. And then when the NRC made a decision about what their recommendation was,
Mhm.
all of a sudden people were saying, I never got a chance to have any input in this. And I think you need to be ready that there are going to be the people who weren't there because they chose not to be there, because they didn't even hear, they aren't even thinking about it. And when they think about it, they might have a very strong reaction and act like they weren't allowed to be part of the decision, even though we were making every effort to make them part of the
The
decision.
only thing I would tweak in the comment is not when they think about it, it's really when we make some recommendation. When there's something to react to, people react. When we're very open and just in listening mode,
How do
And
people
they-
feel about the attendance? I think my personal expectations are very unrealistic, given the effort of letting people know, and I put stuff in a lot of mailboxes. I don't know if there was anybody from Black Birch, for example, some people from Throw Hills, but I expected more people from the local community there. And maybe one or two younger families. I think it was largely the people who've been to the EPA. Well, I would call it disappointing, it's just. I
Do
wish
we
there-
know who was on Zoom? Do we know what the profile of the people?
Good question. We do have all the Zoom names. I haven't studied those.
If you put the people on Zoom in the room, it would have been full.
I think there was just under 100 in total, which is a little bit under EPA. We didn't quite beat Kara, who I'm gonna ask for her feedback, and Terry in a moment, but. I thought it was good. What,
I want to respond to a couple points that have been made. I don't think our outreach is, well, of course, we don't think it's done. But in terms of proactive, finding the people as opposed to having a meeting and letting them come to us, I continue to take that as a responsibility. And particularly the people who would have some, eventually, when we recommend something, reason to have concern. So people who didn't come to Warner A, but are loaded because they live on the pond or something. That they're gonna be in play. We can think that through and should be, and I have been. And to that end, specifically, I want to bring to everybody's attention something I received from an attendee who is a friend of mine, Richard Foreman. You know Richard?
Yeah.
You all know Richard? Very well thought of guy, terrific guy. He wrote an absolute environmentalist scary screed for the town's eco resources book about this. The lead was, and I've responded, and he and I are in conversation about this. He thought my response was very responsible, but I thought his screed was not. And his lead was, if you had to name the most dangerous places in New England, Concord has a candidate. And it went on, bulging with contaminants. I could go on. My response to him was 3 pages. And it was reasoned, but it was critical, and he accepted all of that. All of which is to say, that's in conversation between he and I bring it to your attention because you should know about it. But he's the kind of person who represents the community that we have to make sure I reach out to, as Carrie was suggesting,
And he's a
to make sure they're
credible-
not hidden but lurking, and we know that we should have reached out.
Right, he has a reputation as
And a
a
following.
credible spokesperson and knowledgeable
Right.
about a lot of things, so.
Question if I may, he was in the audience.
Yes, he was.
Yes.
You're right, was this in response to the forum?
No, he and I had
Some time
been,
ago.
I'm sorry,
Put a date on when this This,
The thing I received from him was post the forum,
okay,
but it was not in response to the forum specifically that was written.
but it wasn't.
And he and I were in conversation previous to the forum, in which he wondered, how did I become aware of this? Did he contact me? Did I become aware that he was aware and say, do you want to know anything? In the first correspondence, he had questions about what remains to be done, and he's brought classes there, as I alluded to in the meeting, as an environmental bad guy site to learn from. And in my first email to him, I told him, so here's what they're gonna do. They're gonna put this wall down around the basin, and they're gonna put the iron in that binds with the DU, and here, and they have to do the soil under the foundations. And said, thank you very much. This really raised my awareness, and it was seemed very even. So I was quite taken aback to find out how environmentalist alarmist this thing was. That's my description, but I think.
Actually, it is a candidate for being, if you look at the real estate and the land in.
It's not close.
It's a national priorities list Superfund site.
His language was dangerous, and without
But you just described, he said it's a candidate for being, actually, if you hadn't come up with candidacies like that, you might come up with that.
I was very careful in my language.
Ordinance, like Fort Devens.
I was very careful in my language to deconstruct his language on the basis of scientific risk assessment. On the basis of scientific risk assessment, it's not close. It's not.
I think it's incumbent upon us to separate the past from the present and the future. What it was in the past, when it got its initial hazardous ranking at 53, whatever it was, it still wasn't the highest ranking in New England, even when it was totally contaminated. But I think we have to impress upon people that that's not the way it is now. That's not the way it's going to be in the future, and just keep on separating the time period.
That was one of the points that I did make to him, that, when they first, like, for example, he said, when they came in, there were 34 contaminants of concern. And as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, most of them weren't found at levels of concern. They were just on the checklist.
They were present.
That's the difference between danger and
No,
scary.
just commenting on his
So-
candidacy comment.
So I made that specific observation to him all along. I was going through on scientific risk assessment. The other thing that's really critical here is, even then, you didn't have exposure, which you have to have for something to be dangerous. You're not dangerous to me if I'm not in the room with you, right? And dose. And he left out both. So what this tells me is that there is an undercurrent of the environmental folks still having the chemical contaminant, blah, blah, blah. And I suppose I can raise it now at this point. I suppose we're on it. I had toyed with the idea of creating a website for our task force. We could post minutes. There isn't a hell of a lot to do.
There's a town website for it.
No. A specific, more fleshed out information. The town has links.
Yeah.
The town has links.
Correct.
That's not a website.
You want information.
That's links. That's correct. Our summary description of what's going on, what we're doing, our little bios, well, that's on the town website. A description of the then and the now. We could talk about what should be in it, but the purpose for this would be, in my mind, to try and frame the conversation exactly as you said, Paul. Because it's gonna come to these people, oh my God, risk, Superfund, blah, blah, blah. And we have to help the town's process understand that it's not now what it was. And the website could help with that, but I'm ambivalent about it really being necessary, because I don't sense that people really much give all that much of a damn to go to
I
it.
think you also run the risk of becoming
Advocate.
subjectivity and advocacy.
Yep.
Which I already hear in this room more than I feel comfortable with, and I think we have to be really careful to be data driven, to put up things that are well vetted, that are based on whatever is credible, and not try to start digesting too soon at the risk of, I think, sounding like we've already decided is one of the most dangerous
Oh,
things we can do.
absolutely.
I think we can run the risk of that. As a newcomer to this thing, I will say, I mean, it sometimes feels a little bit like we really want a particular outcome. I think I share the outcome that it seems everybody wants to have, but we've got to be really careful about appearing to be decided, because that creates a tremendous amount of distrust. I think we can be at risk of that, and it becomes very easy to do if you do a summary kind of, digest for the public to hear from.
Process wise, it wouldn't be published until we all had a say, and it would be very, here's what, very repertorial journalism, not us. It would be very, here's what the EPA data says in regular language, for example.
So let's, we have a website and the documents post on the website. If there are other documents, or we want to, revise the website for key documents in certain areas, let's put it in there. I don't want a separate website.
Okay, fine.
Address, I don't want to be insulting, but the lowest common denominator here. And, there are people that are going to doubt whatever we say, no matter what, but we have to keep emphasizing the facts and put things in perspective. I think our presentation did that.
Yes, I
We
do.
talked about the history, where it was, how much money is being spent on it, what the cleanup goals are, residential standards. People can ignore that, but we have to keep on driving that home, I think. And as far as predetermined outcome, I think in one of the newspaper articles, I said, I think collectively we have this predetermined outcome that we want, whether we own it or somebody else owns it, the community would like this 46 acres to be a productive property, whatever that means. So we don't want to just sit there and.
Oh, yeah.
So I think everybody would be in agreement whether we should buy or somebody else should buy it. Should be a productive piece of property, because we're spending, taxpayers are spending $300 million on the site. So it'd be foolish not to think about if it's a productive property. Whether the developer develops it or something else, however you define productive. I think that's
Nobody
we should be
nobody
in
would
agreement.
dispute that.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for the long-term opportunity to use it for something, why would they spend $300 million? You could just cap the whole thing and put up signs.
And on that note, I'll ask, can I ask Kara and or Terry, do you have additional feedback on the forum? And thank, Kara, should ask, and Kara and Mina and Bruce were all there in support. And I had to
And the
defer,
root people.
and the root people, I had to defer on the there were, as many questions of remediation as it was on our work, so it was great that they were there. Any comments, Kara or Terry? On the forum?
Sure, yeah, I think it went really well.
You're on mute,
I think,
Kara, I think.
am I off mute now? Hello? You guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, maybe they're having an issue in their room.
Draw pictures.
I have words. Terry can hear me.
Terry, can we hear you?
Terry, why don't you try again? Maybe they can hear you better.
Yeah.
I don't know. Terry, do you want to try and go ahead and see if it's,
Do I have to do
Yeah.
something? For a second, I'm getting my technical help, I'll go ahead.
Tara?
yeah,
Can you,
yeah, I can hear you fine. My guess is they're having an issue bringing their audio in.
Can't hear Terry either.
We had that issue at our public meeting the other day, so I understand it's a thing that happens.
But I can hear you. Who was that?
Now I can hear you.
Any luck?
Try again.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I just want to thank everyone. I thought the task force meeting went really well. Can you hear me talking? now? Yeah.
Yes,
Um,
thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you. So yeah, I think it went really well. I think there's really good turnout. I think people are engaged, which is great. I said two kind of notes. One, in relation to meeting attendees, as a parent of young children, I would say if you're going to get any of that group to show up, Zoom is your friend. That's the only way I've attended a single town meeting in the last 4 years, right? Like the only way I can get it done is if I turn on Zoom while I'm also, helping my kids and doing our family thing. So definitely just, that audience, that's probably where they are, right? They're not accustomed to coming to meetings in person, and it's just easier to work in on schedules. The other thing I just wanted to bring up, one kind of undercurrent that I noticed during the meeting is I got the sense from multiple people that there was a misunderstanding as to who owns the property. I seem to get the sense that a lot of people kept referring to, well, EPA should keep it. That's EPA's property and it's their thing to deal with. So I do think as we continue our outreach and you continue yours, that's just another thing to kind of drill home to say that, describing an orphan site is confusing, but this is an orphan site. There is no owner. We're kind of right now we're carrying it through its cleanup, but we are not the property owner. Concord is not the property owner, and there is no steward for the site kind of going forward. So if that, just for future meeting references, we kind of drill that home to people that the alternative, kind of what the alternative is if Concord doesn't take it, right? The alternative is unknown because it has no owner and there is no kind of direct plan for what that will be.
Okay, thank you. Glad we can hear you. Terry, let's try out so we can hear you.
Okay, I thought it went really well. And can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I thought it went really well. All the speakers were excellent. That rehearsal that we did the week before was really useful because it really came together. I also agree though about the caution. There are a lot of good comments. This task force is very experienced, and that the people who didn't show up are the real issue, and we are at a different stage. And I totally agree that, we should learn a good lesson from Warner's Pond. That, in the beginning, we're going along, things are great. Everybody loves the process right now. Everybody's really appreciative, or they're not paying any attention at all. And as we go down the road and the rubber meets the road, that's when. So you guys are well aware of all of that.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. Anything else on the forum? A little later, we're going to talk about, do we do another forum? Work my vote. We'll kick that can at least a half hour down the road here. Okay, next topic. So I want to do a slightly deep dive into the, I don't know, the name has changed so many times. I call it the ownership operations work stream. I know that Carl and Carrie produced a couple of
And
then
with significant input.
let me put those up here on the so what are you taking away what we have here? Two separate documents that are questions for other communities and other site managers, number one. And then the second document for town. You want to lead us through this?
Sure, I mean, I will say on the first one, which is the question for, site owners. These are questions primarily from the perspective of our work stream. So one of our charges is to kind of understand the town's obligations with respect to institutional control. So, we put in a bunch of questions around institutional controls. And then, what the impact, what the fiscal impacts have been, what the operational impacts on the community have been. So I'd say that's the primary emphasis of the questions. There are definitely, some early context questions about, what sort of planning happened, what was the context in terms of communities' views about the site, whether a reuse plan was done, whether the site's been reused or leased for any purpose. So, and then it really goes more into the institutional controls and you know, fiscal issues. I think, I know other work streams have talked about speaking to other communities. So I do think it's kind of a question whether we fragment this and different work streams have their own conversations, or whether we try and, you know, combine efforts and do it together, but, you know.
We should talk about that.
I just wanted to add one thing, that, and with respect to what other communities have gone through, I've done some reading in town reports, for instance, for the town of Walpole. But what ends up in a finished report doesn't give you the dynamics of the process they went through. It's more where they came to. So, you know, I could read one report from, you know, 1 year and another report from 3 years later and make some judgments. But it's not going to be the same as actually talking to people who were involved in that process when we get to that point.
But
And
I also think, you know, these are not simple questions,
they are not.
and the answers, you know, who you end up speaking to and what their knowledge, you know, someone could be, we could speak to the town manager, they could have been there for 6 months and not know the whole history of this. So, yeah, that could be a challenge too, finding the people in the communities who, you know, have the information that we're looking for in these questions, so, you know, and I also think, you know, it's just scanning some of the information that we receive from EPA. You know, what are the quote comparable sites where we'll get the type of information we want? It's not always, you know, like in Walpole, for example, it's, you know, the site was acquired by the town for specific town uses. You know, I don't know what they did, whether they looked at other private uses and stuff like that. So, you know, whether we find sites that would necessarily be as helpful for all the.
So, I mean, this is a 2-part question. How do we find these communities, and then how do we coordinate? Are we, so with Kara's help, we have this list of Massachusetts sites and some detail about reuse and about residential, you know, to what extent they're cleaned up and who owns the site. Are we strictly limited to Massachusetts sites?
I don't think so. I think finding sites that have dealt with some of the same issues we're dealing with is probably more important than just Massachusetts.
My experience with these sites is that we won't find one that's comparable to us, but each one will have an element that is relevant to us.
Yeah.
So that's part of the reporting job of the person who's doing the contacting and whomever, to run down what's up with us and see how it compares. Love Canal might teach us something, but that's pretty apples and oranges to us, right? But Sil Resins was still on the EPA list. I mean, I covered that in the late 70s. It's heavily reused now. I could probably go to the neighbors and remember some of them. It's the relevance thing. I don't think we're going to find a complete match. I think with the right reporting, establishing the conversation, beginning conversation, we can pluck out the things that are relevant. And that leads me to a question for you. That's a long list. And I want, and it's to your point, a question, wonderful, about coordination. I wonder whether you want to assign individual people on the, you know, to committee task force. You take this town, you take that town, or you two take this town.
You're 2 steps ahead of them. Oh, look, I'm just saying, how do we identify the community? Well, I think your observation that, so like Superfund sites like snowflakes, right? No two are the same, which is very true.
Actually, my God.
I mean, there's very few that have been cleaned to residential standards, and very few that have been cleaned to residential standards and have housing on them. So I think we have to back up and not so much worry about what they've been reused for, but to identify sites that have been acquired by municipalities. Because I think they all have institutional controls they have to manage regardless of what use they all have insurance issues which may differ on reuse. So, you know, we're not going to find a site that looks like ours that is cleaned up to residential standards, I think. Or we won't find more than one or two, so I guess it's an open question, how? Do we find these sites on our own? Do we ask SKIO and EPA for more help on this? They've done some of this with the reuse group, correct?
I thought they were looking into some of this, for us, were they not? Aren't
They have reached out to identify similar sites to some extent, basically to set us up with some interviews. We've already met, Rich and I have met with 2 developers, and they were looking for 1 more, I think, that have redeveloped Superfund sites. So we have a couple of names that we could point you to.
But no, we're talking about the municipalities, not the developers.
I know, what Skeel has done so far, it has tried to identify some developers for our purposes, and they are developers who have redeveloped specific sites. I think Walpole might have been one of them, I don't know, but they, anyway, looked at, 2 or 3 different former Superfund sites around Massachusetts. But what you're talking about sounds like a much more extensive and detailed look at, survey of all Superfund sites to find ones that are analogous.
Well, to find communities to talk to who have acquired these sites.
I'm just saying, like, I don't think Skeel has done that yet. I don't think they've gone to that level of detail.
I think they gave us some of those, or EPA gave us some of those.
We also asked them, I asked, and I think that one of them was gonna look into towns who chose not to acquire.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that's,
Yes.
I think implied in our conversation right now is that skill list wasn't really very helpful in terms of. Honing in on who to talk to, who not to talk to. I mean, it was a start, don't get me wrong, but I certainly couldn't use that list to. Do much by way of prioritizing who were the.
Yeah.
Who
No, I
were
think,
the good.
And I will
candidates.
second Court's comment with a suggestion. I also found that to be true of the EPA list.
Mhm.
So there were sites that I covered that weren't on that list. There were sites that I covered in the 70s and the 80s that had been completely resolved, where they were all listed as not available. That list too is, I'm sorry, nothing against you, Kara, specifically. I know you plucked that for us, and thank you, it's a helpful resource. The suggestion is that I think somebody, and I would be glad to do it, has to do the homework.
yeah, well, you have to
Us.
go through the
We don't
list.
have to wait for somebody else to hand it to us. Somebody's gonna have to do the homework of, I'll call the state, I'll call EPA, I'll do some digging around. Give us a list of communities that have gone through having Superfund sites, state or federal, quite frankly, messy sites where the community had to decide what to do with the site. Did they acquire, did they not? What for? What did they go through? That the homework to try and find sites that would be helpful to the questions that you're asking, relevant. To bolster what we already have. I think it's incumbent on us.
So we can ask Karen and Skio, to do more research, and already put a lot of burden on them. But there's also available information on the EPA websites. If you look at EPA Superfund redevelopment, there are a lot of sites listed. They're not all in Massachusetts, they're not all in New England, but they're, one of us or some of us can start doing some of our own homework.
Volunteer.
We have a volunteer here to use this thing called the internet, right? And
And the phone.
because I've looked at that as some very good.
There are tons of resources out there. to
It
help
doesn't have,
bolster what
it
we've
doesn't
got.
have all the information that Karen gave us on these sites. But at least it'll identify sites that have been redeveloped, then we can find out who redeveloped them.
And let's not lose sight of the fact, or at least I'm sorry, in my mind, I'm not losing sight of the fact that this is only gonna be one source of input into our overall process. This doesn't have to be the most comprehensive homework process ever. We need 4 or 5 sites to give us some guidance on.
Well, this depends what we really want to learn. I mean, if we want to learn about, the pathway to acquisition, then, sites that municipalities that acquired the site may be helpful in that. If we want to learn about institutional controls, sites that the community has and has institutional controls in place, we can learn about. So it's partly a question of what, if we want to learn about how a town acquired a site in which there was private and public reuse and how it went about that, that's a different set of questions.
Is your list of questions a fair guide that I might be able to use to direct my search?
Well, they're not all gonna be.
It is for our work.
For your work stream.
Well, they're very detailed.
Yeah, oh my God.
But I mean, you can back up and if you open it, if you identify the right person at the right site. There's some basic questions. What are the challenges you had in acquiring a site? What are the challenges you have in managing the site? And the conversation can get into these detailed questions, but it's, starts with more, those are the general umbrellas, acquisition, redevelopment, managing sites, what are the experiences that?
I don't see it as a matter of, getting somebody on the phone or across the table from me and going down the list. I have it in my mind as identifying the people that would be valuable to speak with, initiating a conversation, and then sort of selecting from this list what things might be appropriate to speak with that person about in that particular community and set of circumstances.
I have a sense of what we all want to know from these other communities. This is a more detailed guide. I can have that in my mind as I'm doing this research as a guide, but not a Bible.
So
Wait,
therefore,
But I think once we
not-
get to the community level, we may want to say is. Who would we want to speak to? If we really want to learn about X.
So that's what a reporter asks.
And in the end, I don't see it as a, well, if you get an X here and a Y here and a Z there, that's the answer, you're gonna do this. No, it's still gonna be a public opinion, and there's gonna be a lot of value judgments. And we'll make our decision.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good questions here. The one I'd like to add is sort of what was the status of planning for the use of the site when you acquired it? Both, did you know what you wanted to do? And secondarily, was it zoned? And for what? And did you rezone it as part of the process of acquiring? Because I
In
think
fact,
that's gonna be important going forward.
Walpole seems to have already had a committee in the works that was trying to figure out how to manage, restructure town facilities.
Is Walpole, sort of the low hanging fruit in our effort here? They
It
come up several times.
seems to be because, well, it was a very different site in that it was central, like more downtownish. It was manufacturing, there were hazardous materials, it was not radioactivity, but more solvents and remnants and so forth. So they were already talking about, we need a bigger police station, we need more, senior center. And it seems like that was sort of coming together at the same time.
Combination of development potential and
Yeah.
Right,
the other.
So,
Right.
so
and
talk about-
it was surrounded by residential. Which was affected, but not changed. I mean, they didn't end up tearing down blocks of old houses.
My sense is that a Superfund site that's out in the middle of a field in some rural, those are the ones that kind of just get closed off and put up signs and say, do not enter. But if you're in, as we were told, a good zip code or right adjacent to downtown, there's development potential.
But even those 100-acre, stranded out in the middle of nowhere sites, 100 years from now, somebody might have a different idea of what to do with it.
So tell me about the coordination step here. Once we identify the 3 to 6 municipalities, I'm throwing that out there.
Ashland is going through this
As a
right now.
sample size.
Diane.
What's the coordination between the review
Well,
group?
I think it might make sense to basically, might be helpful to have everyone on the committee take the community, or have one person, assign it to individuals as opposed to divide it up. So one person can look at the wall, one person will look at that. That might be one way to handle it. If we have a set of concerns or things we're trying to learn, but we divide it up among.
So I would just say in terms of coordination, Rich, can correct me, but I mean, we're at a stage now where we've, for the most part, already conducted a lot of the interviews that we wanted to conduct, and we're trying to pull the information together into a useful form that we can share with the rest of the committee. This is the first set of data. Then we've got to decide what we're going to do with the data, and we haven't gotten there.
Have you
yet,
spoken
but
to who though?
We've spoken to
Developers in your context of your work stream, people?
Developers and potential town users,
Yeah, municipal officials, developers, and.
but I mean. Potential town users here in Concord,
Yeah,
not people who did use it elsewhere.
My suggestion, if I may, to in answer to Carl's question.
Yeah.
Is to have, and I'm volunteering for this again. Other people can join me, but there should probably be a I see these as helter-skelter if we all do them and do them differently. So it feels like it would be more productive if there's like, and I'm volunteering, have one person and Pam, we're gonna do the Uber and whomever's and, or, sorry, I just volunteered you. You know, I'm happy to do them. I'm happy to do them with you. But it strikes me that, having, a single work stream asking the same things and listening in the same way would probably be more productive for the task.
Can I suggest a milestone, a deadline?
Yeah,
So you'll see from the work plan, I think a lot of our work should be done, so by the end of the first quarter, I mean, this initial research, so early in the first quarter. I think you should identify, it's just like January-ish, identify those candidate municipalities and then get this work done by the end of the first quarter. I mean, this is December already, right? So I think, is that reasonable to identify these early in the year?
and start the conversation.
Start the conversation.
Absolutely.
I think it'd be either Carrie or I mean, I know Carrie was kind of had a strong issue with this, but I think it'd be someone, having someone from our work stream.
Yeah, I got it.
Be involved in it.
Okay. But it's so step number one, let's identify, look, we can all go on the internet and help Dave here. I'm sure I will. Please identify these candidate municipalities for interrogation.
And I would look at the reuse committee's report, because it was a summary of a bunch of sites.
Oh, awesome.
And
And also,
and I have a larger spreadsheet that we put together. Research that.
Don't forget about that report. That's the report. Pam, you were anxious.
I actually think that Kara's list is really, really good and you're just saying that some of the items on Kara's list don't have all the information there
there were several sites that I know of that aren't on that list.
that are Massachusetts.
Yeah,
Superfund sites that were.
well, Superfund or State Superfund.
Well,
that
no,
I-
she was, this is Superfund and they were taken by the municipality.
I understand that. I'm just saying there's a broader universe of communities that have gone through contaminated site cleanup and reuse questions from whom we can learn than just those that were on Kara's site. It's not that Kara's site is incomplete for the EPA, but the EPA's list is only one.
Okay, can I ask Kara has a hand raised here, has a burning comment.
Burning, always burning. I just wanted to chime in on that. So the list that I provided, just so we all understand it, bar one was, is there a part of the site that is municipally owned? Right? Very few of the Massachusetts 32 Superfund sites are owned by a municipality, right? So you had to meet that bar. You had to have some portion of the site either owned by the city or town or the state. So very few of the sites, many of the sites like NMI are still orphan sites. So they don't have an owner or they're still privately held by another group. From there, I split it down to say, have the sites been reused? Does that make sense? So first you had to kind of meet this municipally owned and reused line to be on the list and be a Massachusetts Superfund site. And I just think listening to the discussions, I think you just want to be careful to not kind of go too much into a funnel and consider both sites that are municipally owned, but also you can look at the ones that are just in reuse, right? Like we can, I give you one list where they're combined. You can pull them apart and look at the sites that are redeveloped. You know, for example, in Woburn, at Industrial Facts, none of that, I mean, Anderson Transportation Center is owned by the state. Otherwise, none of it is owned by Woburn other than like a small like wetland parcel, right? Woburn doesn't own the sites, but they've gone through many phases of redevelopment. And so I think that's the key, is kind of pulling them apart a little bit to say, you know, there's municipal questions and there's redevelopment questions, and not getting too caught on the combination because there's just not that many options, right? Like Nyanza, huge site in Ashland, a lot going on. It's not municipally owned. And a lot of the redevelopment there is all private redevelopment. So just, you know, be alert of like that limitation if you're trying to only look at both, because as you said, you know, Superfund sites, they are snowflakes. Everyone is different. Everyone is unique.
My question is, for the sites you're talking about that are not municipally owned, did those communities even have the option to acquire the site? or
Not so
continuously privately owned?
that's one of those things, it's, it's hard to prove a negative, right? We can't.
Yeah.
We can't know. So in some cases, they're privately held, right? Like W.R. Grace in Acton, it's a privately held site. Concord took a piece of it, so that piece is now owned by Concord, but otherwise it's still just a privately held site. And so there are sites like that, and there are sites, they're orphan sites, like Microfab in Amesbury right now doesn't have an owner, and Amesbury has kind of looked at it. They looked at it years ago and they're like, we don't really want it right now, but they did not go through this process that you went through. They kind of looked at it and said, nah, we don't know what's going on yet. We're going to kind of stay away from it.
Look, that's a learning
That's
possibility.
Yeah,
Yes.
So
Right.
Kara, I'll have a conversation with you. It broadens the parameters to the broader list that you have, like, Silresum. I know Lowell talked about whether they should butt in on ownership. I have no idea how it ended up. I think it's all
Mhm.
private now in malls or whatever the hell it is. But I
Right.
know Lowell, the community talked about whether we should. That's part of what we want to learn from.
Right.
So that will broaden the possibilities within the EPA universe. I'll have a
Right. And so
conversation with you.
I think that's where Paul's saying, they start with the Superfund redevelopment program, their list. You can see what's been redeveloped on certain sites. And from there, just look into them regardless, because we're not going to know things like that. Like the Lowell site in Silresum, Lowell didn't acquire it. But the discussion and when it happened over time, and if it was ever done at what level in the town, if it was just community level versus town management, right? Like those things, they're not tracked. So
You won't track them, but a person on the phone can ask around, was anybody around town hall then? That kind of
Mhm.
reporting, second level reporting.
It could be
Right.
anecdotal and it could be one person's view, but it will.
Is it useful to us? Is my inquiry.
mhm.
Okay, so we have a good list of questions, we have, an action item to identify.
Just one thing I was saying, the questions are great, if people have. Maybe they could just edit this or, or send me a note, just so we get everyone's questions in there.
Your list.
The second list that, that Carrie provided was the, go back to that.
Well, before we get there,
You're gonna-
there's Scribe, where is the EPA list? I see Pam is holding one, but I don't think I've seen it.
I think I sent that to all the task force members spreadsheet, did I not do that?
Okay,
And
Yeah,
every
it says that
site
everyone.
that Kara talked about is still on this list.
I will send that back out again.
okay, I'm sorry, maybe I
Um,
missed out to lunch.
yeah,
That would be the
sometimes
first time.
I have emailed this evening, and it doesn't happen, so. Let me check that, so that list, my action item is to get that back out. Again, the second list is, more on the issues of infrastructure and finance for the town. Questions for public works, for the light plant, for the health department, fire department, police, natural resources. Now, I know the reuse group has already spoken to some of these.
Yeah,
Not
but
all of them.
yeah, but our questions aren't about. Does your department have a need that the site will
Right.
address?
So
This is really about-
the need for coordination, they're probably not.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean. In essence, these are really trying to understand the fiscal, financial cost of the town associated with reuse, and then. How that might vary if the town. Is to own it.
So Megan, I think again, we're gonna need your help in running some interference, as he did, to give a heads up. Carl, I don't know what your schedule is for kind of,
I mean, it would be good. I imagine it's gonna take a fair amount of time and a certain amount of back and forth. To get this done, so I don't know, I mean, I don't know if in terms of the town's calendar, my inclination would be to start sooner rather than later. But I don't wanna put it before people if there's some, if right now is a bad time, because there's a lot of other work issues. I also imagine earlier relative to town meeting. Perhaps would be
Can I
better.
just ask a question? I'm like, I don't know, does it need to be that formal of a process as opposed to like Megan has these questions now? Can we just email them and CC you? and say-
I think it's gonna. I think it's fine to send the questions. I think there have to be a follow-up conversation. So, because we're essentially, you know, we have to get them to look at this master plan, especially for like Public Works and the White Department, we're talking about infrastructure, I think they have to sort of, we don't really know what the use is. We have this master plan concept. I think the notion is, okay, you're gonna have to extend roads to service these sites, you're gonna have to extend water to service these sites. So I think you're having that initial discussion, and then, you know, how can, what's a reasonable basis on which they can make some estimate? You know, because it's still gonna be at a very first order.
So these are all in the meeting packet.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, I think there's a few different ways we can do it. Typically. We have pre-development meetings with. Developers that wanna talk about a project, and we get all these people together in a room and go through, you know, a proposal, and so. This is a lot of questions, and some might need to be broken out, but I think we all usually benefit from having. Help in the room when we're talking about, you know, water connection, you know, it's always helpful to have people together, so.
Maybe that would be a way to start, if.
Yeah, get
Yeah,
through.
I'd be happy to come. to
Especially
one
if
of
I,
those
if I
meetings.
sent them, well, we could just have a new one for this, but if I sent them out ahead of time and then we get a representative from the groups.
Right. And then we could sit down and go over the reuse. Master plan concept and see what some of the issues are, so I think the sooner we start the process,
Sure.
the better.
So this, of course, this all input. What's it gonna cost to develop the infrastructure, what's the cost of managing the site, if and when the town requires it, so this is.
Well, I think also,
Or if we don't, like, if
What's
a
that?
developer wants to come in, one of their big questions is, well, what infrastructure is gonna be there? You're gonna have sewer?
right, I think.
Or are we gonna
our-
have to do our own?
We don't require it, it's just somebody's gonna buy the site.
Yeah, and there's still, whoever develops it is still gonna need to have
Town
sewer.
And
But
yeah, it was
also-
a-
Right, but
not gonna-
that owner, then that owner starts the process.
Yeah,
So,
well,
I don't wanna, this isn't,
the- I
we
agree,
don't wanna be surrogates for a private owner.
well, no, but I think. Some of,
It's-
some of
it's
the-
up.
there are gonna be fiscal impacts whether the town uses it or not.
It goes to the
You know,
president.
It's conceivable to develop, if the town doesn't acquire it, the developer would acquire it and put in all the infrastructure, I guess that's possible. But it's still gonna impact police services, it's still gonna impact fire.
So,
But I also acknowledge that if the town of Concord identifies a real need that could be done there and isn't, what's the alternative and what does that cost? You know, and in infrastructure and ongoing benefit and cost benefit kind of stuff.
I'm far from being an expert in knowing how things are done, but I spoke with somebody in the planning board, I said, you know, we're trying to get this information. So we figure out what it costs to develop infrastructure, and she said, well. If there's a private developer, they're gonna do it, and they're gonna pay for it. The
Not
town's not gonna pay, but
If.
Not necessarily,
This is not a typical development, right? It's not a private developer buying land and they're responsible.
You might be courting them.
This is gonna be a negotiation, yeah. That's weird.
Question for Megan. So these pre-development meetings sound like a great way to get everybody in the room to ask them a question, but a pre-development meeting has a specific thing on the table that everybody can look at and answer the question, and we don't.
Well, we
And
have
for
a master
example,
plan.
just to add to the thought, one of the questions that I can imagine asking police and power is, if we don't acquire it, what are the implications for you guys? Right, that is a down, sure, the developer's gonna build everything, but we still have to give him power, et cetera. I would want the town's input to help me decide whether we should acquire it or not. Because the or not has implications for the town, but the question I have, to get back to it is it premature to have that meeting with you guys?
Well, in a lot of communities, there's an effort in economic development for site readiness.
Okay.
And it's really just kind of like, what do we know about this site, even if it's, I mean, where I was in Maynard before, it might not even be for sale, but we all need to share kind of what we know about it, and so that we can be prepared and proactive if someone were to
So it's
come.
not premature to go ahead with something like this.
Well, also, I think
I don't
that
think so.
the select board has asked us
Yeah.
to address some of these questions
We might not
by
have all the
October,
answers.
next October, so.
But we can tell you, I mean, there's
Yeah.
a 40B exploring the parcel right above.
Right.
So we know there's no sewer, we know challenges with the private road next door. I mean, these are the types of things that, there are things that we know about parts of town that we can provide, and if we don't know it, maybe we can find out, maybe we can't, you know what I mean?
Right.
So, but we're happy to, I think a collaborative, meeting with, some of these folks would be probably a good way to go.
But we do have, the store man is the master plan, for the
Right,
reuse plan,
Right.
it's,
I mean, assuming we want to reuse certain parcels of the site, you have to extend infrastructure to service those parts of the site. So that's really the starting point for those conversations.
good.
Well, one thing I think we need to do, Gary and I have talked to all, I think, of the potential town users except DPW. And we've got notes from those things about what they're interested or not interested in. And I think we should share those with you. And the other thing, Megan, is the one problem we've had getting an interview is DPW. I don't know. Help with that.
Yes,
I'd appreciate it.
definitely.
Or maybe you just want your work stream to be invited to that meeting as well as the operations. I don't you.
Meeting with them tomorrow, so.
Okay, so this is sort of it's a brainstorming meeting, this is a meeting that probably, again, in the first quarter, we did this.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great if we could do it this month or early January, get
This month. We meet this.
I mean, December, or early January. Once again, I think it's gonna take time to explore this and figure out how to get the information, and if you're looking to have the actual information by March or April, we have.
Well, that's on the agenda for like,
Yeah.
8:20.
I think I can commit scheduling a meeting or working with you to schedule a meeting to have an initial conversation. I think the things that people don't know right away.
Yeah, I know, that's right, it's just to start the process.
But
It's
yeah,
just to
yeah.
start the process.
Well,
Yeah,
And you've got the question list in the.
Yeah. I have it here. I was trying to read
Okay.
it sideways, but now I have it.
Can we leave your work stream here?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Good, I mean, great progress and lots of work ahead. Any quick updates from legal? I know we had a lengthy earlier conversation with me at the second stage for this, and by the way, on legal, I've asked Mina to attend the December 12th task force meeting, so we can have a deeper discussion with them on the whole task force on the legal issues, but maybe you guys want to give a brief update on where we are.
There's little else to report. Council has looked again at title. And nothing new. I think we can report that. And December 12th is when Mina will, as you say, join us and give us an update. The work he's done since the 2021 memo that we submitted to the town. Only, I think, includes progress that has happened on the site, so nothing about the questions to be answered is being addressed there yet. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, issue identification.
So let me just add to that. So one of the early important pieces, and we discussed this with Mina, is well, besides the title search, a part of that is identification of liens and find out, I'll put the resolution of the liens, where we are with that. So the list of liens that I think appeared in the reuse report, it was confirmed in the title search, and basically the federal government has a lien of 20 million plus on the side, and there's another 15 million in private liens, so it's about $36 million in liens. Which of those are still active, which of those can be resolved is to be determined, so that's, a pretty high priority task, and, EPA back in 2021. I sent a note that basically said, we're willing to talk to you and potentially resolving the liens under certain circumstances. And I confirmed with Kara that offer to discuss the resolution of the 21 million was still on the table. It doesn't mean it's going away, it has to be negotiated, but so I think one of the early action items that you suggested is kind of pursuing the EPA conversation. And I just, I want to let Karen know that occurred. There's nothing formal yet, but I think that's something that we want to discuss with Nina on the 12th. So just a little bit of an update. Because I did say that.
That's it, I mean, one thing that I think is generated from us, not as legal advice necessarily, was the finding a way to start a discussion, a real discussion with EPA on this kind of important matter.
And it's no surprise, Kara and EPA, the town's gonna need your help and in order to, see its way to acquiring the site in various ways, so. No point in discussing in more detail here, but since you have your hand raised, Kara, you got a question?
Yeah, I'll just add, yes, I confirmed that with my attorney today, that EPA is willing to, they want to work to resolve the liens. I will note that she's told me in the past that the EPA and really DOJ, the Department of Justice, can't get into detailed discussions on the liens until Concord has made a more kind of active step, right? If they've made an active decision to acquire it, it's not still in kind of the fact-finding mode. If that makes sense.
Wait a minute, you're saying that Concord has to determine that it is decided to acquire before we engage in discussions with us on resolution, that you said of the liens?
So we can discuss the liens. We cannot negotiate the liens until we're at a further point down the road.
Okay, that's a little bit different than what I heard as well.
Yeah.
That's clear. And it's clear that this was discussion, so everybody understands the parameters so that the town can make a decision whether to proceed or not, and once that decision is made, then the negotiations, the real
You can still have
conversation starts.
negotiations.
Yeah, right.
But at least now we can
Negotiations
have
not
a
a
discussion.
100%.
What stopped us in 2021 was we didn't have Nina. The town didn't authorize us for legal counsel. Now we have legal counsel on board and authorized to help the committee.
Right.
Chris had made the offer in 2021.
We're authorized to have those, I don't know, preliminary conversations leading up to the decision. So, which I'm hearing EPA will have, but they're preliminary discussions. So I think we're on the same page, I think.
I think so.
Okay, good updates. Any other updates on any other work streams?
I'd say maybe the one thing that's coming out of our discussions is that developers don't run screaming away from the idea of acquiring the site. And that the feedback we're getting is that housing is of more interest than commercial / office. If there were to be private development.
There's more interest in developers?
The developers are much more interested. They don't see a market for substantial office development at that site. And at the moment, the market's down, but at least one we talked to said even if it comes back, it'll be closer to better transport options than 2.5 miles down.
There's demand for the site for housing. For commercial office, it's too far from highways. And from the road.
But that could be a very different situation for municipal uses.
Oh, yeah.
Such as.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
No,
Works
I
and
mean,
so on.
We're overdue with our notes.
Yeah.
We'll share the notes with there's several, also interest from several.
Yeah, and there's at least 2 town entities that formally are interested in the site. One is housing trust, and the other one's recreation, and maybe others as well, so.
So you're gonna tell us that, right? All that.
That's what these notes,
That's gonna be great. That's very.
And NRC is very interested in.
Well, NRC.
White plant, maybe?
Sure.
Yeah,
For a
yeah.
couple of acres.
Yeah, not a lot.
It's
Yeah,
right
but
next to a major distribution hub, you know,
Right, yeah.
The light plant will go to.
more the batteries. you know.
Well, I misspoke. There's municipal light plant solar, there's NRC, there's recreation, there's housing, so there might be others. And so there's various interests. Which is a lot different than 2 years ago. But great.
The school committee is this buses, things like that.
We've got a new bus site and we have a new, soon-to-be surplus property. So it really hasn't come up.
You don't need a new middle school.
No, because that new middle school, yes.
No, this yard.
Go.
As was wayside.
But it does occur to me that when the process was going on, that eventually moved the light plant away from Cottage Grove to 2A. The original idea was that Public Works was going to go as well.
And that's one of the reasons we really do need to have a meeting with Public Works, because in talking,
Right.
actually, you were part of that meeting.
I mean, the
When we
advantage
talked
was
to the
going to
planning
be, you know,
department.
planning, the town could keep the site, it could be planning and recreation, and it would be all clean and wonderful for people to walk around, and Public Works, among the reasons, was having to negotiate the rotary every time they were coming or going. for things,
I
and
mentioned,
being on the opposite side of town from where the landfill was just about to be totally reconfigured as well.
I mentioned the Peabody site. I don't think that our conversations can be anything less than fully coordinated with Peabody conversations, because we've got two properties in play. Both significant properties.
We could put third or fourth properties in play
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
if we start doing. you know,
So I'm not saying that's our job. I'm simply saying we need to see
You
that
need
we've
to
got a
consider it as
companion
part of the
effort
puzzle.
with which we're coordinating or.
So let me report on the conversation that when Gary and I had with the select board member after our meeting. There was almost a plea for us
Really to
to
expand our.
suggest to take up the mantle for that kind of planning.
A facilities plan, a town of Concord, long.
Yeah, I mean, how does what we may be planning on doing at this site relate to what is happening with Peabody, what's happening with other properties in town? So my reaction was, whoa,
Yeah.
that doesn't seem to be our charge, but I understand the relevance of doing that. And so, and I think it's not a new conversation that Megan hasn't heard, but it has to be integrated. And I know,
Yeah.
because I'm on the recreation commission as well, that could be good their recreation, they're interested in Peabody, so who's making these decisions? How's the town plan? It's larger than this task force.
But I think we can do a light touch, which
We can do-
leaves recommendations for a facilities master planning process, you know, if we identify all of the, I mean, you know, there is a
Right.
question of what's gonna happen at Junction Village. There is a question of what happens if, you know, Department of Corrections moves completely, you know, there are strategic parcels around town that we could identify as what needs to be included in a broader view.
And if nothing else, it's if-then statements.
Well, as this moves forward, we're gonna need some guidance from Megan
There isn't such a.
about
We don't have a property.
how far we get into this, so.
Yeah, I just want to add one other point that, you know, from the housing point of view, Kai's Road is out of the MBTA zone only because it's municipally owned. And that MBTA zone proposals abut it on both sides. And frankly, if you're gonna have relatively dense housing near Concord Center, it's probably the most sensible place to put it. There's already dense housing right next to it with the old, with the, you know, Kai's Road or Rose Hawthorne, whatever you call it. So, I mean, that's something to keep in mind, because that, you know, would, if other town functions had a better office somewhere else, I would make the housing argument for that. I'm not making it now.
Okay, well, we are going to be faced with this plan, but let me turn to,
Quick question,
go ahead. Well,
really quick. To Megan, would we benefit from looking at the facilities report, or is that too granular for our purposes?
Our facilities report has information about that, yeah, I think it'd be useful, it's enormous.
All right, that's why I haven't read it.
I've read the parts that are more pertinent to me, but for example, it has an assessment of 141 Kais Road in every building. And says, like, this is the challenges with it, here's how you could maybe renovate it. With some costs that are like not real anymore, because I think it was 2020. So, but I think it's definitely useful to see kind of what's on the table and, yeah, I think. Do you have that?
I'm sure I can pull it up.
It might be harder than you think.
Okay.
It's a really large binder that we have and we can send, I think Eric, sends the sustainability director, has made a way to send around easier. This is a huge download. Anyway.
Why don't we move it in our direction and then we'll discuss how to dig into it. Because once again, it's sort of like people, we can't move alone.
Yeah.
Absent all these other pieces that are on the chessboard.
Absolutely,
Yeah, but we're just one piece on that
well,
board.
but
I
you know,
understand.
We're not playing the game.
if we're one of the catalysts, you know,
Yeah, I see the issue. It's a big complicated question for Ted.
catalysts for activation energy, but speaking of catalysts, so in response to the, I don't know, comment or criticism that we didn't have a work plan. I threw this together just as a straw man for sort of how I, and I want you to think about how the task force sees it's doing its job here. So so we have the first month in May was sort of getting organized, right? That's the first arrow. We started in June, I'll call it workshop research and coordination. This is our work streams, and we started in June. The reason why I mentioned the first quarter, I saw this going out at least into the first quarter, but bear with me, it went to March, the end of March, first quarter. Our public forum took place in November. I think at the end of this research, we need to find out from the legal side, from the attorney, that quote unquote, this is doable, this being a possible acquisition is doable. That's gonna put us on the road to, yeah, we're thinking of acquiring, or we're thinking of recommending not acquiring. It doesn't mean we make that decision, but we need to have some initial legal findings that then lead to this next thing, which I call workstream integration. So, okay, what do we do with all this research that we've done? How do we integrate it? Or when do we integrate it? Not exactly how, we have to figure out how we're gonna integrate that. But that would begin, so beginning of the second quarter. So how we start blending all this together with the sort of the legal push of the legal wind behind our sails that. And then at that point, I think we'd be in a position, if we wanted to brief the select board on where we are. When I talked to the select board, Henry and others said, talk to us, we want to be involved, and I want to talk to them at the right time. When we have something to say and we have something that's somewhat definitive, it doesn't raise more questions than answers, so I put that in there, maybe that's the right time, but I think briefing the select board, we're gonna need to do that. Having a second public forum. For what purpose? Good question, but I think it's advisable that we engage the public again. When we have more information. And that's the point, we're gonna get a lot of tomatoes thrown at us, right? That's when we actually have some ideas, and that's where we're gonna get some real feedback. Not that we didn't get real feedback in the forum, but it was more of, oh yeah, it's good, we understand what you guys are doing. Now, if we have some meat, some information, some initial plans, it's probably time to kind of test that in some degree in the public forum. I don't have any idea what that means, but I think just engaging the public there. That doesn't mean maybe that's the only time we engage in outreach. We're gonna have to probably have other things, but the second formal public forum, I think we have to do that in the spring sometime. We're going to have to start drafting our report. If we're gonna get this done by Halloween, which is the bottom thing, we're gonna have to start drafting. Probably midsummer, because it's gonna take us a month or two just to draft and redraft and get to the point where we have something that we can start reviewing and revising, you know. I've been through many reports that you guys have, and we, through the reuse committee, it takes some time to put this all together. So I was sort of reserving the third quarter into the fourth quarter, doing report writing and revising, so that we'd be in a position to meet the deadline on Halloween. So I don't know what you think about this. The arrows can move in different directions, and maybe I'm missing something here, but I thought that's just the first crack. As we think to the end game and where we are right now, I think these are some of the steps we have to go through. David?
When do you see it coming to the point where you ask for a show of hands about whether we should do this or that?
I have the same question looking at.
Because you can't write the report until you have a sense of what you're gonna say.
I think
And
this.
if the answer is no,
And I don't particularly see that X on there, but it seems to me a step that sets those final steps in motion.
I think this happens, sort of at the beginning of the work stream integration. Because I think that integration has to lead to some recommendations, so I think.
So you think it happens at the beginning?
Should it?
I mean, I was thinking the same thing, but not the beginning. I was thinking that happens at the end of integration.
Towards the end or
Yeah.
within it. Yeah.
Somewhere along there, I think we'll get a sense of where we are, but it's a really good question. I don't know what the exact date is, but that's the period.
That's kind of a mental target date that I think we need to have in mind. That's like
Yeah, but
when we're gonna kind of start deciding date is, in my mind,
Well, we clearly have to do all the research before. You have to
done,
that's
right?
are you envisioning the public forum number 2 as a sort of trial
Exactly.
balloon of here's where we think we're going and what's your feedback?
I don't know. I think that we have to have another public forum. I don't know what the purpose of that is going to be yet. I have a feeling that David might have. Here,
If we end up at that point leaning away from the town acquiring, for whatever reasons. What's our obligation for a plan B? You know, in terms of our report to the selectmen,
So I'm sorry,
let me select that.
in terms of our report to the selectmen.
yeah,
If we're leaning strongly towards no as a committee
right?
by, what is that, May of 24? What else do we do after that?
We write it up.
yeah.
We write it up and
We have to write up a report.
We've been.
Or another
Either way.
We have to.
or we have an obligation to say, well, here were the things that we considered and here are the alternatives that seem to be.
We have to defend our recommendation, whatever they are, and
Right, okay.
that's gonna be in the report.
And I think there are some things like these uses appear viable, zoning should permit them. That even if the town doesn't
Right.
acquire, or here's a way to protect the
trust
natural
zoning.
resources if the town doesn't.
Yeah, I know of some things.
We've been
that
asked,
say,
we've been asked to consider alternative ownership. And so if we say, you know, recommend the town, then what is the
What do we-
alternative?
The devil's
ownership?
advocate question
I,
here.
I think all 4 work streams have information to convey whether we decide to acquire or not, but my question is for David is that. Do we schedule a second public forum before we have that very important question of like what we're recommending? I feel like we
The
want.
way I see this, that's the trial balloon of floating out to the public, where we think we're heading.
I would hope we come up with a recommendation, the town should or shouldn't acquire. But then I think we're obligated to say, if it works out that we acquire, then these are the risk mitigation steps, these are the financial thresholds that we'd have to consider and so on. And if we don't acquire, because we may not meet the acquisition metrics or costs.
But we
So
still
we can
have some big
recommend, but
questions
we still
about,
may not get there as a town.
long-term control over uses
Exactly.
of the site.
Which is why I think we need to be working together in this integration step before we actually formulate
Yes,
a
I
recommendation.
Yeah, that's what worries me, is I don't see how we can do these two when we're still doing this.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think we,
Well, that does raise the question of what the second public forum is for, and whether it comes before the end of that arrow.
And if
So in
it's
my mind-
before, then we probably need a public forum number 3.
No,
I do.
no,
both.
well, I'm sorry, here's a view, not no. Here's a view. In my opinion, we have been asked by the select board to recommend things to them. In my sense, we need the town's input to inform our recommendations. We gather those inputs in a variety of ways, including in public forums. They do not react to our report. They inform the process that leads to the report. There need not be a third forum to say, here's our report, what do y'all think? That goes to the selectmen, and then it's for them to have that conversation with the town, and I'm not ducking anything, that's my understanding of our charge, of our role.
That's a good point.
Yeah, this is exactly the conversation I want to have. Don't take this far too literally. Things can move, the next thing can put around. I just want us to get thinking here, but I would, since Terry has her hand raised up, and since we've been talking select board, what do you think?
Well, just a very quick comment, about the timing of the public forum number 2. Right where you've got it, looks like the exact day of town meeting.
Meeting.
Well, good, ready to show up.
And informing the select board is gonna be well.
We'll do it the
for
next week.
Yeah,
town meeting.
okay, my bad, but Terry, let me ask you this, I got the sense that at least the chairman of the select board, if not the whole select board, would like to be briefed on where we are sometime along the road here. What's your sense of the need for doing that and when that would be?
Or is it covered by you as sort of the liaison?
Yeah, I don't know.
Right, well, some of both. I mean, we had a number of, select board members at the forum. We had a quorum, we had 3 of us, right?
Yeah,
Maybe we should see what happens when Mina comes in on December 12th. Cause at some point, the select board might start to need some executive sessions, but we're not there yet.
well, I think maybe this X were the initial legal findings, assuming it doesn't conflict, would be a good time to have that executive session, because I anticipate that Mina will have some very pertinent answers at that point.
Right,
And he may want direction too.
Yeah,
I mean, I think the executive session is not just merely informational, it's to position him perhaps to take further steps.
right. I think the tricky part is that spring, I agree with your timetable, but spring is a very difficult period. You've got the election, you have new select board members coming in, you have town meeting, and then finally we're done with that. We have about 3 weeks and everybody just wants to relax. And then it's vacation time already. It's a very tricky time period. So when you ask about coming before the select board, I couldn't even tell you, we're gonna have a new chair in May. And we're gonna have a different system than we have now. So there's a lot of unknowns.
yeah,
I
okay,
I think that sounds like a perfect time to brief the select board when they're relaxed.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Well, then maybe these 2 X's, it's like when a public forum moved to the right.
Yeah.
Somewhat, but,
one question about, I mean, we were just discussing this issue of town facilities, and it seems like one important consideration around whether the town would acquire the site is how important the site is for future town facilities. And so I'm wondering, given the complexity, how do we work that into the
Yeah,
schedule.
I was gonna, building on that exact point, like, I don't think our recommendation is to acquire or not to acquire. Our recommendation involves all 4 work streams, and it's gonna be a much more complicated recommendation, it's gonna be a set of recommendations.
And,
Well-
and it's not a binary thing, even if it were,
Right,
Illustrated,
right, right.
whether it's two is not.
Not a yes or no.
It's
Yeah.
not yes, no, it
Right.
could be a sort of a critical path of various options.
Well, I think these, this work stream integration, this is the period where we gotta resolve
Yeah,
all this, and we have, we have 3 months to do that, that's. Probably, we're gonna need all that, because that's like at least 3, if not 6 meetings here, depending on the rate. Rich,
Yeah, I just worry that, it's taken us this long to get here. Getting through all of this and getting here, is there magic in October 31st? Because I think this is more than 6 meetings, frankly. I think we're talking 15 or 20 hours of debate, even after we have all the information.
For what it's worth, I chaired the Energy Future Task Force, and we very soon realized we couldn't do it in a year. And we went to the select board and I don't know if this group wants to do that, but it may be unrealistic given just what was just observed about where we are right now. And
Particularly since I don't think we're gonna get the select board's attention between late February and after town meeting. I mean, my goal would be to engage know enough to talk to the select board when they're relaxed after town meeting. And then work on finalizing the report, finalizing our recommendations. And then working on the report over the summer. The one thing I think we can do even during the summer is to write and critique other people's writing, but.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I probably you're right. I'm more optimistic. I believe once we have all the information, we're fully informed. And that assumes that at the end of this research, we are fully informed, whatever that means. We'll be able to make a group decision, whether it's binary, and then it's just a matter of getting it all on paper.
I just respectfully disagree.
I know you do, and I will,
But
I
I'm the junior.
I will need my hat when.
I will respectfully disagree on the legal side. I think on the legal side, you may not be fully informed in some respects, based on the number of people, the layers that will.
We may not.
I think there's a likelihood.
We may not be fully informed, which is one reason, I'm pushing on that pretty hard. Because I believe that since we've been kicking this can around for many years, that coming up with the answers about the BFPP and the liability and the covenants not to sue are going to be relatively easy compared to the resolution of the liens. And I think it'll all come together. I believe it can.
The only thing I would say on that, and I hope you're right, is that processing some of this documentary material through the US government is not simple. And I think,
but remember, we're not trying to
I'm just saying.
acquire the site.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is have enough information
Exactly.
to
Exactly.
inform the
I'm
select
not-
board.
I'm not
They
saying
would
that
continue
they
this
have
process.
enough information. It's also possible, depending on what comfort level the select board needs with respect to executing various documents, getting comfort letter, whatever we're gonna have to do.
Yeah.
Depending on their needs for certainty, you could find yourself with less than a full set of information.
Yeah, and we
That might be fine.
And we
Like,
can-
our recommendation may be, we think it's, that the patch would be X, but I'm just telling you that I think there are some ways that this could be a slow process if you are waiting for all the relevant information.
we can make a recommendation, caveat the heck out of it. And, here's our recommendation, we haven't resolved X, Y, and Z. And the select board can say, okay, we'll spend another 3 months doing that, or the select board can say, we know enough to say, we're really interested in acquiring it. We're not acquiring it yet, because it's gonna take a year or two. I think, after that point, to come up with finally the papers and to do negotiations. So the acquisition is not gonna take place at Halloween. It's gonna take place, if it takes place in a year from that point, or fair. And during that time, there's other, you're gonna resolve a lot of details, whether we can meet and others can actually negotiate. What we, the select board, what we tell the select board, we hope we can negotiate. So we'd like to resolve all this, none of it. We're gonna have a clear indication of which way to go, I think. Yes, no, or in between.
Just referencing back to
Yeah.
our.
Yeah, you're
our-
right, it's good. Yeah.
High chance that I'm wrong.
Referencing back to our earlier discussion about, well, it isn't binary, I'm reading from the charge here, the purpose of the 229 Main Street Advisory Task Force is to recommend to the select board whether the town should acquire the property at 2229 Main Street. So they're looking for a recommendation.
But ultimately, it's gonna be whether to seek to acquire.
Right, well,
And they know that.
right,
And they know that.
but whether it's a good business decision, and that's all.
Or no, what does the pathway to acquisition look like? And
But
we
they-
recommend that.
But they go
pathway.
on in the charge to say, and
Yeah.
advise on X, Y, Z, and W.
I guess I'm just responding to, we can't, I don't think they're looking for a report that says, well, maybe we should, there's a pathway we should acquire, is a pathway we shouldn't acquire. It could be this, it could be that, I think they're looking for a recommendation
Yeah,
to
really.
acquire.
The importance of the end of 2024 date, and as Karen mentioned, because that's when EPA will seriously start engaging with us. If the select board makes it, says, we are really interested in acquiring, it, let's sit down. Then I think that's the point where we can,
Unless you
It
have a
gets serious,
totally
come-
different administration who wants to,
we're totally different select board.
kill the deep state and, not the
Well,
DPA.
that's true, forgetting about. Forgetting about the end of democracy, that's okay.
I want to get back to Rich's point. I too am uncomfortable with the October 31st hard deadline, and I think we just got to keep in our pocket the possibility as our work develops of at some point going to them and saying more time might be productive.
I agree, we'll have plenty of time to discuss that.
Yeah, so what else we got to do?
I like Paul, I am more optimistic, I think we probably can discharge our duty by the end, so I'm comfortable with the timeline that you laid out there. But I do want to push back a little bit, because even though you're right, our charge says we should inform the select board whether to acquire the site. Based on conversations that we had when we did the first report, my sense is what the select board is looking for is to be informed enough that they can make that decision. And if we give them, a recommendation to acquire if this condition and this condition and this condition are met, but we recommend you don't acquire if this condition, this condition, and this condition are met. I think they would be just
Right, no,
happy, I think they're very
that's
comfortable making a decision
That's right.
without us
That's,
making a formal
that's-
recommendation to acquire.
that's right.
Well, under what conditions, so.
Qualified,
Under what conditions,
The
yeah.
path that we did would say.
That's-
And I think we can do that by December.
But that is,
I hope you're right.
Remember
I don't
that-
want to be doing this.
that has always been the plan, because remember, things can't be negotiated
Until
until the decision is made, so we're not gonna know if it's it's possible.
Well,
But
yeah, but then
complete
you
that.
gotta.
Okay,
you
let's
may not
comment
want-
before we adjourn.
Your timeline put the end of work stream research at the end of March, and that was the time when the initial legal thing was gonna be completed. Is there a reason those can't be in the middle of February? And then integration has more time. Work stream integration.
Let's see how it goes, yeah, I mean,
I think certainly if our work stream. It's not gonna happen by the middle of February, I just think there's too much information and too many questions around the town.
I don't know where, I'm not sure when
It depends
Rue.
when,
what
yeah,
Rue
when is
is,
the risk assessment?
Yeah,
gonna be done?
that's quite a while off.
There's no
Is there a
curves.
hard deadline for Rue's risk assessment?
It's, it's June 30th, the tag stuff is due June 30th, 2024. The October 31 date had been discussed, to give the select board time to deliver it before the warrant opens in December, so it gave them the decision of whether to push the warrant. But the warrant's open for a month, next year, so maybe you push that to November or something, but yeah, the roof stuff. They have to be done by June 30th, and they're just waiting for some additional data from the Maximus right now.
What is the, I mean, I understand it's frustrating to have this thing kicked around for years and years. But is there any particular urgency in accelerating this?
Yes.
What is the urgent, what is the?
We're not accelerating.
Or what's the
We're already
urgency?
behind,
Behind what?
because the cleanup is happening now, they're spending $300 million.
Right, they're gonna do that.
And we have no input on how that's
So
being
it's a
spent.
question of input, we're losing the capacity to give input, that's the reason. to do
That's
it.
what I see.
We already
Well,
have
we-
two areas that have been redeveloped and in rolling hillsides instead of in flat fields or some other use. that we
So
might-
that's a really good explanation, it's because presently we're losing opportunities to influence outcomes on site. That we could presently influence.
We're losing opportunity, and also if the town wants to be in a position to break ground in 2028 on something, it's gonna take this period of capital planning, budgeting, negotiation, that's gonna take some time. We may not, the town can acquire not do anything for 10 years, but I mean,
That's her.
but I think there are enough needs in town that,
Question is that, but that's the answer. that
But
the
I
select
think
board
that's
would give,
part of the
that's what I
urgency
want.
that I felt since June of 2021.
And that's the urgency that the select board itself is feeling. Yeah, got it.
I don't know, I think Bruce Thompson has asked us, for
So you have to write-
input on the remediation.
Yeah, he wants to know where to put the hills. and the
He
flat
says, what are you
spots.
guys gonna do with the site? I said, well, we're working on it.
He's gotta push it this way or this way. He says, tell us.
Why don't we all go up there and decide where the ballparks are going, just tell him.
He's doing it and he's putting hills where he wants.
There's no engagement with the town.
Well,
We don't have anything to tell.
Yeah, what would you tell him? And we'll do it.
Okay, this is exactly the conversation I want to have. It's not the last time we're gonna discuss any of this. I really appreciate it. As far as, so our next meeting is on the 12th. We need to pick out a date in February. I sent out a memo, a series of dates up until the end of the first quarter. There's one date that we have, February 27th, we can't do. Because that is the date that, it's a hearing on the warrant article.
The select board has the public hearing in the warrant.
Okay. So that week, we're gonna have to pick another date if we want that. Let's not do that right now. Let's do that the next week. Well, any other public input? Okay, great meeting. We are adjourned.
I second and approve that.